Hey everybody, this is Brendan. All right, real quick one tonight. Just on account of the fact that I left my laptop at work and experiencing that weird mother separated from her baby feeling of being separated from my own laptop. My girlfriend is being kind enough to let me use hers, but I'm going to try to span through this quick, so I'm not quite setting up as much as usual. So all right. Last week I issued the my urban fantasy reading challenge, which is basically just where I'm asking people to recommend some urban fantasy books for me because I have an ongoing problem with the urban fantasy genre, and where it's like on paper all the constituent parts of urban fantasy as a genre are all things that I'm interested in, and yet the actual most urban fantasy books that I've read, it's not just a matter of liking them or not liking them. It's feel like I'm not getting them, sort of, and just because very frequently these are like the fun reading or sort of like the reading that people do to sort of like relax or just sort of enjoy themselves and let their hair down, and people who I really like and whose taste I really like. This disconnect is not so much, again, it's not so much liking it or not liking it, but just sort of like not understanding what other people are liking about it, is something that has sort of bothered me frequently. Okay, but people gave me a bunch of books to read. I'm going to give those books to read before, and then what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be reading them and figuring out some format in which I can react to them. It might be like a chapter by chapter thing, or I just like read it, or I might just be read through them and then just have a lovely screen go nearby, so that whenever I come across something that causes me to I have a thought, I might just stop it and record that thought and edit that together. I'm going to try to figure out something that's going to work. I'm not sure, but before I announce what the books are, I just kind of want to talk about something, just because with urban fantasy generally, I've run into a little trouble, and I felt like even just in soliciting the books that I had ought to read, I fell into a little trouble again where so an example, all right, that I've heard some people say of how if you were a writer and you're looking at books and looking at stories, how you should be able to regard those books and stories is sort of comparing it to a sort of a surgeon on the operating table, where even though you might know on some level that the person that you're operating on is a parent or a coworker or someone with dreams and aspirations and a real live human being equal in status to you in some sense, you don't think about that when you're doing the surgery. You're just thinking of that person just sort of as kind of an inanimate object that follows certain rules, and you deliberately don't want to be feeling emotional about it. And I've heard people say that you should feel that way about stories too. And I think clearly that's sort of not quite right. I think it's definitely just an example of taking the most extreme an extreme, attractive, clear example of something that actually takes you pretty far away from the reality of it. Because honestly, I mean, there's not actually that desperate need to be looking at stories with quite that much impartiality, right? And especially when you're talking about stories that people like, and especially when you're talking about stories that have been recommended to you. And what has happened in the past when I've talked to non-writer folks sort of about this, I've frequently put myself in the position where I felt like I was being a jerk, or I felt like I was hurting people's feelings inadvertently a little bit just by saying oh, I don't really like that book that much, and here's the reasons why I don't like those that much. Just because I think that most popular fiction is more about character than anything else. It's more about like giving you characters that you can hang out with, that you want to spend time with somehow, and that's the main. And that the books sort of give you the chance sort of to do that and to spend time with these people and to feel connected with these people. Most genres are about that, and my strong suspicion, maybe we'll be proven wrong, is that urban fantasy is even more about that than lots of other books. And that what happens then, just because of that, is that when if you're sort of doing these sort of surgical, impartial approach to sort of these things, people feel like you're insulting their friends, and people take it personally, and it's it's a little bit frustrating. And this is where I'm going to stray a little bit from what's really useful on social media and for Facebook videos and algorithms and stuff, because what people really like is really what people tend to really respond to on these kind of mediums is some kind of an extreme opinion that usually attacks someone else, just so that then people that agree with you feel like ha ha ha, we're on the side that's attacking, and then people that disagree with you are still going to tune in and listen because it's oh no, we're being attacked. And so the sort of the most extreme example you can pick up is really the best option. And then the second best option is to pick some kind of a middle ground that is still sort of very sort of specific and kind of interesting. And the worst case scenario is what I'm about to do, which is sort of to call for moderation and then admit that finding moderation is kind of messy in this particular circumstances and likely to lead to mistakes, and that there's nothing to be done about it, and you have to figure out the best way that you can. And people don't really like that because it's just really unsatisfying. It doesn't feel sort of good to regard. It's possible to feel like, well, yeah, that's not a sort of a conclusion at all, even though really that's the kind of conclusion that most of us have to live with both things. And that's kind of the conclusion I'm going at with here, which is all this is basically a long-winded way of saying these books, I'm going to be putting them on the operating table a little bit. I'm going to be a little bit impartial about it. I'm also going to be going to some lengths not to be a dick about it and not to be I'm not really sort of going after this unfairly, and to try to take these sort of on their own terms, and if I find where something I don't like, to express that in a way that I hope that nobody sort of takes personally or sort of feels like that I'm hoping that nobody will respond to it that way, because that's not how I mean it. This is totally just me a thinking out loud exercise where I'm trying to understand something, and I actually appreciate all the input that people have put into this that are letting me do that. And that's the spirit that I'm approaching it with, and I hope that people can follow that. So anyway, long way around. Books that I'm reading are going to be The Last Hot Time by John M. Ford, Midnight Riot by Ben Aronovich, Rosemary and Ruby by Sean McGuire, we'll say. Moon Call by Patricia Briggs, and lastly, oh boy, here it is. Stormfront by Jim Butcher, which an author that I have mentioned previously that I have kind of a complicated relationship with. That I'm surprised that people read, but you know what? Yeah, it's all right. I'm gonna read all 5 of these. I'm gonna figure out some. I don't know if I'm going to do videos on all 5. I don't know exactly what the format is going to be for me responding to them. I have stuff to figure out. But this should be interesting. And some of these I have not heard of, and I'm looking to seeing if they're good. So yeah, thank you everybody for recommending me. If you want to look right down here, subscribe, turn on notifications so you can find out when I do issue these forth and let people do the video based on these or all the other videos that I do. If you look down here, you can join my mailing list, get some free ebooks, find stuff where you can buy my books. And that's it. I hope everybody's having a lovely evening. Have a good night.